When we hear the word sin, especially in 2022, it sounds like a very outdated way of thinking. It sounds like an old word that religious leaders would use and throw around to keep people afraid of God. There's almost like this belief that it's really not a thing anymore. But if we take a zoomed out look at culture, American culture especially, we can see the effects of sin in our everyday lives, on social media, everywhere we look. It's in our government, in our politicians, in the social injustices we're seeing. You might swipe up from this video and see something that is a sin against you that's offensive or harmful, or all of those different kind of things. So if we don't know what sin means, but we're still grappling with this idea of something's wrong, something's broken inside of us, where do we go from here? And that's where I want to take us to take a look at the Lord's Prayer, arguably one of the most famous prayers that Jesus has ever talked about and taught his disciples as they asked Jesus, how do we communicate with God? How do we do this in a daily way? And in that prayer, Jesus instructs his disciples to say, forgive us of our debts as we forgive those who have debts against us. So what is he talking about? What does he mean by debt? What he's referring to is sin, and this idea of we as people are trying to fulfill something in us, but with all the wrong motives. A great example of this is the relationships we have. You know, oftentimes we're looking for intimacy. We're looking for deep, vulnerable connection with other people, but we find it in all the wrong ways. Usually that looks like pleasure, looks like the sexual explorations that we take. It looks like all these different things that we try to control our lives to find intimacy, but ultimately leaves us more broken. So if we understand that we're broken and we're struggling to figure out how to make this work, we see it in our relationships, what are some ways that we address that? You know, I'm a DJ, so there's a lot of times where I'm out meeting people that are not from the church circle, and one of the things I hear more often than not is, you know, they believe in good energy, they believe in positive vibes, they believe that if you bring positive energy into the world, you will receive positive energy back. And while that's a great ideal to have, one of the things that is missing out in that is that it's deeply impersonal. You know, you're depositing this energy into something that doesn't feel, doesn't know you, and cannot give you that same thing back. The difference with Jesus is that it's very personal. Jesus came to the earth, God in human form, and lived the perfect life. He loved perfectly. He had perfectly intimate relationships with all of these disciples and all the people that got to minister to him. So if we look at Jesus as the example, this example of love, this example of relationship, this example of intimacy, how do we fix the sin that is in our lives? And Jesus gives us the perfect answer. It's in confession. It's in asking for forgiveness. You know, in 1 John 1:9, John writes, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us of our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. One of the things that Pastor Fredo talked about a couple weeks ago was that our depiction of God, our depiction of Jesus, is usually pretty influenced by the relationships we have in real life. I grew up going to church, and so this idea of confession, this idea of forgiveness was something that I knew, but it was something I struggled to believe in. You know, every time I did the confession, Lord, forgive me of my sins, I always said it, but I had this doubt in the back of my mind. I remember one time when I was about 14 or 15 years old, I went to an Easter sunrise service, and I was sitting there and I'm hearing all the good stuff that they're saying, and I felt so conflicted inside because I'm 15 at this point. I've been raised in church. I've said this prayer multiple times, but I still wasn't sure where I was at with God. I always had this fear that he didn't truly forgive me and that I had to prove that I earned this forgiveness. I had to prove that this gift wasn't truly free to me, but I had to meet a certain standard to meet that. One of the great depictions I've seen of this interaction between God and us when it comes to forgiveness is from a show called Ted Lasso. My wife and I recently got into it. It's about this American college football coach who gets hired to coach a England soccer team. What the coach doesn't know is that the owner of the team, a recently divorced woman, is trying to sabotage because it's her ex-husband's pride and joy. So through all these different attempts to sabotage his work, Ted somehow is still succeeding. The team is doing decently well, and everyone likes this man. So she approaches Ted, tears in her eyes, knowing that she has done something wrong. She has broken the relationship with Ted, and confesses all these things to him. She says, "Hey, I'm sorry. I've done this thing. I've tried to set you up to fail." And Ted pauses. He gets up and walks up to her and says, "I forgive you." Such a wild example of what it looks like to be forgiven. And that's such a great depiction of how God sees forgiveness with us. All he wants is for us to come and to confess to him and say, hey, I've done wrong, and he's ready to forgive. The Lord's Prayer is a daily prayer, so daily we come in confession, and God is daily ready to forgive us. My name is McKay. Thank you for watching my short sermon.